testing our microphone. This is a Danny test microphone. Georgie, go ahead.
Georgie, test microphone 1, 2.
So guys, please let us know who is louder. If one person is louder than the other one, it's just very helpful for you guys to help us out with that. So let us know in the chat, please. Okay, mic check without the music on. So this is Danny's mic. Okay, go ahead, Georgie.
Mic check without the music. This is Georgie's mic.
Okay, guys, let us know. Said I'm louder. So I'm going to turn down mine a little bit. Okay, turn my volume down.
Yours is turning up now.
Really? Okay, so now the music is off. Georgie, go ahead one more time.
Georgie, mic check.
I am
1, 2.
I am lower. Just better to get this stuff out of the way and not like 30 minutes later. Kyle says Danny's slightly louder. Maybe let's push the microphone back. Turn down a little. Okay, that should be good. And we're live. Guys, thanks so much for bearing with us. We had lots of technical issues and scheduling issues as well. So thank you guys so much for bearing with us. Georgie, how are you, sir?
I'm all right. Thanks for inviting me again.
Always a pleasure. You make this show worth doing. So what's new with you?
Not much. Chugging along with my studies. I'll send you the report because some people have started to question me when I'm going to turn into another on the back of a tiger. Fake professor. But the cortisol study is complete. It's already, the report is written. I'll send you the full report. Now we're basically struggling to get it past peer review. We've already had a few fights there because they're saying like we really don't like this like alternative therapy to cancer. Why didn't you guys have a control group which had like a standard chemotherapy drug? This is going to confuse people. They'll start thinking that progesterone and DHEA can treat or prevent cancer. And we're like, that's kind of the point of the whole study.
Well, do you want to back up a little bit? Like, what is Cortinon and what are you doing?
Oh, yeah. Cortinon is a combination of progesterone and DHEA and dissolved in vitamin E and oils. So it's actually we did a test with Cortinon. We call it Cortinon Plus. So the ratio, Ray typically recommends a ratio of progesterone to DHEA anywhere from like 1:1 to 3:1. And I think you also have a video on your website how to make a 3:1 mixture, right?
Not a video, but it's an article on my Patreon that's available. If you just type in progesterone, DHEA, RODI, and Patreon, I think it will come up.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have a Cortinon version, which is the regular one. It has a 3:1 ratio. But based on my studies, reading of the studies with progesterone and its effects on the thymus gland and how anabolic it can be to the thymus and recovering the thymus, etc., based on because with age it atrophies. So we created another one called Cortinon Plus, and the ratio of DHEA to progesterone to DHEA is 8:1. So I wanted to do like a test with that and see how it does with cancer. So that's the first study with Cortinon Plus on a specific murine cancer in mice. It's 100% infective, 100% lethal. It's based on a virus. So we use Cortinon to test what it can prevent, first of all, the development of the cancer, and second, what it can treat it or at least slow it down after it already develops. So I think the study turned out very well. I mean, basically, we managed to achieve something that currently no other drug is known to do in circulation. And we're trying to get this published in a cancer journal. And now the peer review committee has already sent some questions back. And basically it's like saying, the way the study is designed, you don't have a group of animals that received a standard chemotherapy drug. Why not? And we said we didn't want, we wanted to compare with control. And there already are other studies with established, chemotherapy drugs, and we already know they suck. So, the results we got already are already way beyond what the standard, drug would have done. They said, it could be a problem because the way the study is set up right now, it kind of implies that you can use this product Cortinon Plus for treating / preventing cancer. To which we responded, that's kind of the point of doing the whole study. So they didn't like that. I think they'll still publish it, but it's now they're asking for some additional information. They said, give us all the references on progesterone's effects on purported protective effects of progesterone against cancer. Like, they're right there in the references section. No, we want them separate. We want them ordered by like impact factor, right? We want them ordered by basically like how legitimate these studies would be, right? So it's all these things that it's creating extra work for us, but we're already getting pushback, and we were told directly the reason is they don't like over-the-counter. They don't like studies with over-the-counter chemicals that are kind of like that are suggesting this cancer can be prevented or treated, right? It's the game is you have to always compare it to an established drug. And they also told us that if we had done the one with the established drug as a comparison, and Cortinon still came out on top, they would have refused to publish it. So then why do it, right? I mean, this is crazy. But there's a lot of politics in science. I think. I give Ray full credit because he's always said that currently science is nothing but politics in a white coat, right? Many people hear that and think, oh, this is such an over-exaggeration. This cannot be the case. Not only it is the case, but it's actually mostly, I want to say mostly, it's like entirely about politics, and then science is only considered if there is something for the journal to gain. Like, whether science gains or not, they don't care. But if you're doing something that's potentially threatening one of their sponsors, and Pfizer is a sponsor of that journal, and Pfizer is, of course, a very big name in oncology, then they're gonna give you a hard time. So we'll see. So, anyways, that's one study where I'm doing the other one with DHT. That seems to be going great. Knock on wood. So I'm also doing another one with methylene blue, but specifically our product Oxidal. We're gonna test its anti-aging effects in living organisms. If you remember, a study came out about 2 years ago about methylene blue managing to fully reverse aging in human skin cells, right? Mm-hmm. But it was in vitro. Mm-hmm. So we will try to do the first in vivo study on methylene blue and see if it actually can fully reverse the aging process or at least severely retard it in vivo model, like maybe mouse or a rat or something. So that's another study.
And sorry, when should we expect the results of the Cortinon one? Like, when would that be wrapped up and fully?
The Cortinon is wrapped up. I'll send you the report so you have it. Uh-huh. The results are already there. The study is no longer ongoing. Okay. Right now, the fight is, so basically we send the journal the manuscript. Mm-hmm. They go over the manuscript and then immediately come back with things they don't like. Mm-hmm. They won't change. Mm-hmm. So it's basically a back and forth. And it takes about a month, right? Uh-huh. And after that, they will send you a link which should be viewable. And I encourage everybody, once I send you the link and you send it to your followers as well, use that link because after 2 weeks it expires, and after that it will be a paywall, and then they'll ask you to pay for the study. Even though we pay them to publish the study, then they ask for money from people who want to read it. And after about a month, that link, which will be a temporary link for people, they basically say, okay, if you want to send it to some of your colleagues, to some of your friends, relatives, they have about a month to bask in the glory of your study, after which it gets removed, it gets put behind a paywall, and then you have to pay, which will be like $50, per review. I'm like, this is ridiculous. The pay-per-view at home on Comcast, they ask for $50 for like a Floyd Mayweather fight, right? Why are you asking people for $50 per download?
That's why Sci-Hub is so important, because like when I wrote my first Hair Like a Fox book in 2013, I did not have access to full text papers, and like I asked myself, how did you even do that? Like it seems impossible in retrospect, and like life without Sci-Hub or LibGen or whatever seems like inconceivable. And the fact that I'll go to an abstract and it will have a $40 price tag and like you're describing, it's like a Ponzi scheme. It's so it's just unattainable for the average layman to read interesting articles. It's a tragedy.
But it's also a fraudulent model. Like basically, like this journal, they get paid by the submitters of the studies. So they already, all these studies that they store, right? They already fully paid for by the people who are submitting them, right? So that journal then to take these studies and start reselling them as their own property, that to me that's borderline fraud, right? They're not theirs. Like you've paid the journal for the hosting, so you pay a certain amount of fee. I mean, I guess they calculate it. It's like, let's say I think it's like $400 to $500 per study, right? So that fee covers the hosting of that document, the PDF document, for probably like decades in advance. So all of their expenses in regards to the study have been paid for fully. And then on top of that, they're saying, you know what? We can make money on top of that. We're going to ask everybody else to pay for that study. And as soon as the study is actually officially accepted by the journal, we, the authors, we are prohibited from distributing it. Like we can get sued for essentially for like copyright violation. If I send you a copy of the final study that's approved by the journal, and like after that 30-day grace period for that link, which is open for everybody, after it's over, I no longer own my own study. Like, I mean, if I have a copy, I can keep it to myself, but I can't send it to you. That's copyright violation. I'm stealing the journal's property. This is insane. And it gets even worse. Many of the journals actually accept only studies that have been paid for by taxpayers' money. Like, so that's and right now the several states actually are passing laws trying to change that, because like some of Elsevier's journals, they only accept for publication journals that are coming out of, let's say, either academia or some other kind of an entity and this entire study has been paid for by taxpayers' money. Mm-hmm. I think there's a federal law which says that if the taxpayers have paid for it, it's public property. You can't be charging people after that and asking them like, oh, pay me another $50 for the study. No, this study was paid for by the taxpayers already, right? So either post somewhere on your website some kind of an unofficial copy that's free, or give some other access that's free, because you cannot resell stuff that has already been paid for by the taxpayers. It's illegal. So they've been getting away for a long time, but I think it's coming to an end, at least for the publicly sponsored studies. The private ones, they'll still continue to extort.
Kyle, who has his PhD and currently is working in academia, says the point is to discourage people from accessing the literature. And I have probably no doubt. V. Pugh says, when will Cortisone 8-to-1 be released?
Probably next week. I don't want to make people wait anymore. So I'll just release it because the results are good. I'll send you the report. If you want, I mean, we can take some of the key takeaways from the study, maybe some of the graphs that I sent you earlier. We can post these, and then basically I wouldn't want you to post the full report on the open internet, but I'll just send it to you as a verification that the study did occur. Georgi is a co-author. I'm not making things up. So and then I'll release the 8-to-1 version next week because people have been asking about it. And then after it gets published, hopefully if it gets published, I'll share the link on Twitter. So people will be able to go and view the glorious paywall if they want to. And please don't spend the $50 if the study gets published. Believe me, I get nothing from it. So I know people have already sent me some emails saying like, "Hey, would it help if we buy your articles?" I'm like, please don't do that. All the money goes directly to Elsevier or whoever the publishing company is, and I get nothing from it. There are other ways to help out with this research. Don't pay the fat cats. They're already too fat, and they're profiting off of the knowledge that we're creating.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of, okay, if you guys are new here, subscribe, like the stream, leave a comment, and that will enter you in the Idea Labs giveaway, which I totally forgot about. If you have questions, we're accepting super chats, and that really helps me out. I appreciate it. IdeaLabsDC.com, that's Georgi's boutique supplement company that we're talking about, so you can go there, check out his stuff. You can follow Georgi on Twitter at Haydit, and he's very prolific on there, so you should check him out. I do coaching at DannyRaddy.com/resources, and I try to make this page functional and have lots of different information, pieces of information that I get, very common questions I get all the time, such as testing the thyroid function. You can follow me on Twitter, and I have an Instagram that's kind of devoted to food stuff. Me and you were talking about the CIA before we started here, but that's what we usually talk about.
That's right.
But we should probably get into some of the things that you posted on your website, hey.me. And since I led the show title with stuff about keto, and since last month or almost 2 months ago, I posted a video on keto, it might be fitting that we talk about the keto article that you put. The keto diet works only for a week, then it causes obesity and diabetes.
Yeah, I think that's a great article. I got so much hate mail over it. I don't know if you've seen the Twitter feed. People are complaining about it too.
No, I didn't see it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it actually has the most likes of any article I've ever posted on my blog. So it's not surprising given how popular keto is right now. Mm-hmm. What I find interesting and disturbing about this one is that despite the fact that, like, the study itself said directly that keto after about a week or two is actually highly detrimental, it will cause directly diabetes, right? Mm-hmm. That's not what the popular press article said. Actually, that because I checked all the other, I mean, I took the study, right, and then I tried to find through Google all the popular press, mainstream media that published about the article. Not a single one of them actually had anything in the title that remotely suggests that keto was bad. All they said is that there is a study comes up with a new optimal like scheduling of the keto diet, and they kept trying to dance around the fact that basically they try to spin it saying like, oh, you should keto works best when you use it at a week of a time, and then you give yourself plenty of break in between, right? But why, right? You didn't explain why. And if you look at the actual study, it says it right there. It's because it causes diabetes and obesity if you use it for more than a week. And it's pretty simple explanation. Yes, initially, first of all, when you get on keto at the beginning, you lose a lot of water, mm-hmm. because actually cutting carbs works very similar to like taking a diuretic medication. Very similar. You lose a lot of water weight. People think, oh, great, I lost all my extra weight. But actually, no, like most of the fat, it's still there. Actually, you're not really losing much of a fat in the first week or so. Afterwards, which is when you've lost all the excess water weight, and then you're starting to go into excessive lipolysis, potentially ketosis even, right? And then, yes, then you're starting to lose some of the fat. But in the study showed that the body, because it interprets this as a stress signal, anything that you eat, actually it's mostly stores it. So the storage mechanism vastly overweighs the lipolytic one, the one that you basically, like, you're shedding the fat and you're burning it. On top of that, because you're not giving your body any carbs, and because lipolysis is so elevated, the liver gets quickly overwhelmed. So anything that the liver cannot glucuronidate, right, the liver will actually try to re-esterify, convert it back to triglycerides, and then send it back for storage into the adipose tissue. Mm-hmm. However, you're already eating high-fat diet, so your blood is already pretty high on triglycerides, and basically the mechanism, like the liver has a way of sensing that, and then the liver actually will not send as much fat back for storage as you would normally do. It will try to keep it to itself because that's what gives you fatty liver. So if you look at the studies that use low-carb diets, fatty liver was invariably always present in every single one of these studies. They just don't talk about it that much. I mean, they try to belittle it by saying, well, look at all this fat that fat loss that occur peripherally. Look at all these like lean animals, right? But if you're having a fatty liver, you're already 50%. You've already walked 50% of the distance towards diabetes. As in another study that I posted recently showed that fatty liver is actually the major cause behind diabetes. The insulin resistance in the liver, which is what fatty liver would lead to, would actually directly give you as a result. That's what increases gluconeogenesis. The liver behaves as if it's under chronic glucose deficiency, which it is, right? Because that's really what the presence of the high glucose in the bloodstream tells you in diabetics. Is that the body is trying to compensate for the poor oxidation of glucose by keeping the levels that much more higher, right? Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens with cholesterol. The elevation of cholesterol with age is not simply a sign of a lower metabolism, which it is partially, But another big reason is that the body would actually increase even endogenous synthesis of cholesterol to compensate for the decreased synthesis of steroids downstream. So that's how you'll compensate for the decreased steroidogenesis by giving even more raw materials. It's the exact same thing with glucose in diabetes and in insulin insensitivity as well. So, anyways, long story short, the study says it directly. You use keto for more than a week, you will give yourself diabetes. There's no question about it.
Two things. So first, I can think of many reasons why a person would feel much better switching to a keto diet. So, like especially if they were coming from, I don't know, a standard American diet or a vegan or vegetarian diet. So I just want to throw that out there. And also, I think Ray talked about the high fat not leading to endotoxin problems or reducing endotoxin in a lot of people. So that could be another benefit. The main gripe, and I put this in the video I have, is people saying that it does not enhance the stress state. And the point that I made in the video, I said that most of the ketogenic and carnivore people that I'm aware of do not have a functional model of metabolic stress that they could explain to you. I don't think they could elevator pitch it. And again, please alert me to somebody that does have that. I'm not familiar with it. And I think that is what you and I are talking about, especially in this article. It's the things that are happening to get a person into ketosis are not these like amazing things that low carb and ketogenic and carnivore people say they are. They're metabolism suppressing. And I think Andrew Kim had a good saying, and he said that he thought ketogenic people were living at the edge of subsistence. And so as the metabolic rate declines, I think you'd probably have to taper down your calories just to get the influx and efflux of fatty acids kind of I don't know, to compensate for that.
Right.
Because obviously some body, like aesthetically pleasing person or bodybuilder using ketosis, I think that would be the thing of like, oh, why can so-and-so do ketosis perfectly and they look healthy, so what are you guys talking about? Like they don't have diabetes or whatever.
There was an actress who just recently got interviewed about keto. I don't know. I forgot it was Gwyneth Paltrow, somebody else. And basically, they asked her like, "How did it go?" And she said, "Well, it was tremendous for the first month, and then you hit a wall, and then it becomes really hard." And then she said, and then basically she stopped for a while. Then she regained the weight, and it become much fatter. And then they're like, "So, do you regret anything about it?" She's like, "Well, it looks like once you start it, you have to stay on it for life. Otherwise, if you stop it, you become much worse than before, right?" So it's like, well, and her explanation was that, well, it really is an indication of how much of a poor state it was before. So that's really like, to her, it was an indication it's the only diet that works. But the fact that stopping it, like, makes you that much worse than before, like, she said it, but it was never discussed in the interview. What does that mean, right? And I wanted to say another thing. One of the main reasons people will go on keto is to lower their fasting blood glucose. After a week, actually, the animals that were in ketosis, actually their fasting blood glucose was much higher than even the one of the control animals. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for the first week it's great, right? I guess you're cleaning house somehow, maybe like it has some sort of like a reset effect. And after that, after the body gets the signal that you're essentially in starvation mode, because that's what ketogenesis and ketosis really is. After that, then all hell breaks loose because you're starting to adapt to this. And then the cortisol, I think I sent you that article, cortisol production increases, cortisol degradation decreases, and you're getting into the state of basically, you're prepping the body, you're constantly signaling the dietary signal that you're in an environmental stress. And the body adapts to that. So it's harder afterwards to normalize things.
Yeah, that's the other thing I wanted to say, and I'll probably say this in a video at some point. There's like a huge conversation over whether gluconeogenesis is like involved in stress, if you can believe that. but it's motivated by the underlying assumption that carbohydrates are bad, or and a lot of the keto or carnivore people will say they're inherently toxic, and so it's like It's like a secondary.
Via what mechanism though? Like how a pure carbon providing nutrient will be toxic
Well,
via what
well,
mechanism?
them thinking that hyperglycemia is caused by eating too much carbohydrate.
That's ridiculous. It's caused by not burning it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's at this point. Keep in mind, there's a drug called acipimox, which is approved for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. It is a bastardized modification of niacin. So all this drug does, it inhibits lipolysis. So if you go and read about the drug, how it was developed, what was the rationale behind it, you're essentially reading Pete's arguments. This is keep in mind, this is a drug approved by the FDA for the treatment of diabetes type 2. And they say right there in their application to the FDA is that diabetes and insulin resistance are what do they call it? They're caused by lipotoxemia. It's not the glucose. I mean, I guess you may argue that these lipids came as a result of too much glucose and then get converted by fat, but that has already been disproven. You have to eat like a half a kilo, like more than a pound of sugar a day before you start actually converting some of that into fat, right? So unless you're eating that much, and I think most people are way below that level, then the novel lipogenesis from carbs is really not something to worry about, at least not when you're eating sucrose, fructose, ripe fruit, etc. Starch has a tendency to increase lipogenesis, but that's because of it has an inflammatory effect. But even starch is not that lipogenic. Long story short, like if all of this fat is caused, I mean, basically like if there's hyperglycemia, consistent one, basically lasting for more than 2-3 hours after you're eating, that's not because of the carbs. I mean, it's the carbs are floating around for a reason. It's not the carbs themselves that are to blame. Usually, if you eat even a very large amount of carbs, even if the body doesn't want to burn it, if you have a healthy liver, then you should be able to convert it to glycogen, and then your blood glucose should be able to decline back to normal. If it doesn't, you're either insulin resistant or you have fatty liver disease. Both of these are caused by fat. They're not caused by carbs.
This is one of the first papers that kind of started shifting my thinking, but it's 2002. It's Steinberg et al. And they say non-esterified fatty acid levels increase long before hyperglycemia becomes present.
Exactly. Yeah. Look up acipimox. It's like the history of diabetes. That the one weird trick your doctor doesn't want you to know is that it's the lipids that cause diabetes, and the carbs are sort of like the innocent bystander that gets blamed for it.
And of course, just to complete this thought, the Randall cycle, I just never hear anybody talking about that. Like, I'm sure we said this before, but the idea that you've solved your alleged like glucose intolerance by removing carbohydrate is like me solving my weak legs by not working them out at the gym anymore.
Exactly, by not straining them, yeah. Right? So let's. So if you're weak, you move less and less and less until you can no longer move.
Yeah, it's it really is a interesting thought experiment to enter the world of the low carb people. And again, just to totally clarify, you and I, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're not shilling for some diet. We're not saying don't eat the ketogenic diet or the carnivore diet, like eat our diet. That's not, I don't think that's your purpose or my purpose. I'm interested in what generates health. And I believe it's that tug of war between metabolic energy and metabolic stress. And that's like the most convincing thing to me. And approaching health problems within that context is just endlessly fascinating to me, and why I think we do these. And so whenever I will make anything related to stress or critiquing these type of things, people will invariably say like, it will get reduced down to a diet to eat. And I'm trying to say, like, I think it's a much bigger equation, and it's much more interesting than that.
Yeah, my only gripe with these diet discussions whenever I talk to people is that it always seems to end up in some kind of like a tribalism, right? So I belong to this tribe and you to this one. But even their own fields, if you look at the individual fields, they've recognized most of what we've already what we're discussing here. First of all, talk to an evolutionary biologist, and they'll tell you that the purpose of fat is to be used as a fuel during long-term starvation, right? There is no way you can use that and say, Well, and it's also a signal. It's like, so if you start burning fat, means you don't have food. That's what it comes down to. That's how it works in nature. So if you're burning fat, whether it's through eating only fat or by like fasting yourself and sort of forcing lipolysis, that is one of the primordial stress signals that you have encountered a period of either insufficiency of food or excess of stress. And this study on the ketogenic diet causing diabetes after a week actually says that. So it's like a keto diet tricks the body into burning fat, and during that, the body acts as if it is in a starvation state, although it is not, right? And begins to burn fats instead of carbohydrates. So by using this diet that is low on carbs, you're sending the signal to the body that, and the body doesn't know any different, right? It thinks that you're under some kind of a stress slash starvation, and that was the original signal. The body doesn't know exactly what's standing in front of you, but it mimics very well the stress response. So you can achieve the exact same thing. So you can, whether you're in ketogenesis because you're eating too much fat and only fat, or you're under tremendous stress and lipolysis is rising to the level of completely crowding out glucose oxidation. It's the same thing to the body, right? So by putting yourself in ketosis, you're recreating the stress response when you don't need it, right? You're not being chased by tigers. You're not running away from anybody. But by triggering this endogenously, by manipulating your diet, you effectively recreating the stress response. Read a study. I mean, this is every study on low carb diets usually has a paragraph where they try to argue this away because they know it is a problem. In evolutionary biology, fats are known as the fuel that is used during stress, and basically it's what this is already accepted. What's more controversial is whether eating more fats mimics the stress response. But every study that I've seen so far says yes.
Good stuff. And I don't really get involved with these types of arguments, but I did post something. I forget where this was from. I think it was like a Science Daily article, and they say, is fruit eating responsible for our big brains? Because one of the most common things is people always going back to their kind of fantasy evolutionary arguments of whatever they prefer, how they think we evolved, and so just to throw a wrench into that. And then Kyle, who's in the chat, and I did steal an analogy from him. He has a really great paper called The Dangers of Fat Metabolism and PUFA, Why You Don't Want to Be a Fat Burner. And what was the last thing I posted here? There's a book that I really enjoy called The Hot Brain. And in that book, they say to be warm is an inherent property of life. To be constantly warm was probably a key step in the evolution that led to the ultimate achievement and development of the human organism. Thus, the primary event required for life, even before acquiring food and water, was generating a hot brain. And so again, I don't think ketosis, like anybody who's entered ketosis and things knows that the body temperature becomes lower. And so again, this is kind of the antithesis to the hypothesis we're putting forward.
There is a guy at MIT. He's a computer scientist slash mathematician. I think you've seen some of the articles that I posted on him. His theory about how life and what life is basically it's a heat dissipation process. And in his theory, the more heat you dissipate, the higher the developmental state of the living organism. And he even says in one of his articles that he thinks that stars are alive, and basically stars are like these highly evolved, developed like living organisms. And he got him thrown out of one of the conferences because they called him an animist, right? but it's I think it's a very fascinating, interesting theory, is that that's what really life is. And the more effectively you dissipate energy you've taken in from the environment as food, as heat, the healthier and the more stable you are. So if you look at all of the highly advanced organisms intellectually on Earth, all of them happen to be warm-blooded, number one. And actually, if you look at the correlation between temperature, body temperature, and intelligence, the 4 smartest ones, if you believe, they actually happen to have the highest average body temperature. It's us, dolphins, elephants, corvids, which includes ravens and crows, and I think octopus is also one of them. But I haven't looked on I haven't checked on the data on the temperature as well. But the first ones I mentioned, they're known as having the the highest body temperature of any other living organism.
Okay, we can move on. We should go back to the cortisol one, but I forgot about this one. The lowering DHT synthesis causes severe hypothyroidism despite higher T levels. I really appreciate you posting this because, well, I won't give it away. Do you want to describe this a little bit?
I mean, it was just a study that I was reading, and it caught my eye. I mean, it's basically they said that it's a well-known side effect of the 5-alpha reductase inhibitors was hypothyroidism. And sometimes they even call it a sick euthyroid state. Mm-hmm. So basically, you go to the doctor. I mean, you're feeling crappy, right? But they'll check your thyroid, they check temperature, you look fine. Yet you have all of these symptoms of hypothyroidism. And apparently, the side effect of the 5-alpha reductase inhibitors was known way before the whole post-finasteride syndrome and all the other related symptoms appeared and got codified, like sexual dysfunction. So all of that, if you look at these things, every single one of them happens to be actually a symptom of hypothyroidism, right? And of course, like the recent study about a year and a half ago that I posted about, that they found demyelination of nerves. Mm-hmm. Some of them were responsible for ejaculation, for orgasm as well. So whenever you have a demyelinating disease happening anywhere in the body, you have three things possible. Number one, toxin. Heavy metals can do it. Lead can do it. Radiation, ionizing radiation can do it. Polyunsaturated fats can do it because they greatly interfere with the synthesis of myelin. Second thing that can cause it is estrogen, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And cortisol. And the third thing is hypothyroidism. Mm-hmm. That's actually one of the reasons for the weakness, this systemic weakness that people with hypothyroidism experience, and the sensory disturbances, the tingling, basically sometimes they call hemiparesis, like they'll have like a numb leg or a numb arm, and these things will like change. It will switch from the left to the right side all the time. They may get like a numb face too, like part of it. It mimics very, very much the symptoms of stroke, actually to the point of being indistinguishable. All of these are symptoms of hypothyroidism. And that those also happen to be every sexual dysfunction, cognitive dysfunction, demyelination, all of the orgasm problems, like low temperature. All of these things happen to be part. If you look at the post-finasteride syndrome and look at the list of complaints, you're reading one-to-one mapping of all the symptoms of hypothyroidism.
And I think we've talked about this before, but I think it's important to point out that the hair loss is likely from hypothyroidism, and then the person is taking finasteride, and it's just making things much worse for a lot of people.
Which, if you read the actual drug, they have a warning saying that if you discontinue the 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, you will end up in a worse state than before.
Oh, really?
So it's only while you're taking it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and they warn you because, I mean, clearly it's almost like the keto diet, like that actress said. Once you start on it, you better stay on it, or after that you'll get much worse. And I found this to be the case with many like allopathic medical interventions. Like basically, like once you start on something, you cannot quit it, or you will end up worse than when you were before. SSRIs, anti-anxiety drugs, like antipsychotic drugs, all of them. It's almost like they were developed with the goal of hooking you up, mm-hmm. right? And then basically after that, you're a slave for life. Like you cannot wean yourself off of these drugs unless you're willing to pay really really high price. Just Google Klonopin withdrawal YouTube. And you will see some very nice, quote unquote, I mean, be sarcastic here, some very nice videos. They'll give you nightmares for weeks.
Just because we're on a low carb kick, do you want to quickly address the glucose is anabolic for the thymus? Because that is one of the things that is so repeated that sugar will interfere with your immune system in some way.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, this thing showed the exact opposite, and more importantly, it showed that glucose itself, not the metabolites of glucose, just the very presence of glucose in the bloodstream was already enough to trigger the regeneration of the thymus and increases the levels of T cells in the blood. And that was the conclusion of the article, that certain macronutrients, actually all the three of the macronutrients, they have signaling capabilities as well. They're not just fuel. So it's like you think of glucose as a fuel, but clearly now it actually has a signaling mechanism because it's triggered the regeneration of the thymus without actually at the same time serving as a fuel, right? So that is a signaling function. Fats have a signaling function. We like to think of it as fuel, but they're much more than that. And I think that's the most dangerous part, and probably one of the least understood part in the keto community is that fats are not just fuel. They're actually a signal. It's a signal for the cells, a signal for the organism. We talked about signal as a stress signal, right? They mimic the stress signal, etc. Protein is also a signal. I mean, the amino acids themselves, even though they're used for building up our tissues and cells, they're also neurotransmitters. We know about glycine, we know about tryptophan, we know about taurine, we know about tyrosine, we know about phenylalanine. So there's so many of these amino acids. So I think Ray has one article where he said that if you take in the amino acids in isolation, some of their effects are indistinguishable from hormones. And he used to annoy his students by asking them to consider the potential hormonal effects of any foreign body that the organism gets in contact with, because that's really how the body interacts. So if it can be digested, it will. If it cannot, then the body will interact with it, and that effect, cause and effect is a hormonal relationship.
I love it, and I had brought up on my Twitter that I posted, levels of dietary carbohydrate can be considered the major signal in the body of the fed and the fasted state. In studies on fasting or carb-deprived nutritional treatments, a good correlation has been found between serum T3 and ketone concentrations.
Just another comment on that. I'm sure you're familiar with the studies that show that during marathon, people can actually regain their strength. They feel exhausted if they do a mouthwash with a sweetened water without ingesting it. Have you heard about these studies?
It rings a bell that you mentioned it before.
So again, signaling function, and even though they claim it's unknown, apparently the presence there's some receptors in the tongue and the gums and the lining of the mouth, and even potentially even in the lips, and basically apparently the presence of sugar, it's interpreted as a signal of an end of the stressful state. So whenever this happens, this is a signal for the brain's enzyme tryptophan hydroxylase to downregulate its activity. So the reason most people experience fatigue during marathons and whatnot it's very often not the lack of fuel, but it's the buildup of serotonin. It's called the central fatigue hypothesis. And in fact, there are a number of different companies out there that work on drugs that block tryptophan hydroxylase, and they're hoping that these drugs will be used for officially chronic fatigue syndrome, but unofficially doping drugs for athletes. So sugar has a signaling mechanism, and one of its primary signaling mechanisms is to signal systemically the body that stress is over, bad times are over.
Yeah, just to tag along on that, I'm sure we've shared this on this show before, but as sugars go up, hypersensitivity drops in 1963 article. And it said that his studies showed that immediate hypersensitivities in experimental animals depends on the amount of sugars in their body fluids. When the sugars are increased, the hypersensitivity reactions are decreased. When sugar is decreased, the reaction is increased. Therefore, to avoid hypersensitivity reactions, sugars in the body fluids should be kept high by feeding well, he said. And maybe we could tie, I'm on like a low carb kick today. Maybe we could tie in your cortisol article with the general idea of the morphostasis or the Jamie Cunliffe immunity model. Because I think that's important too, because carnivore and keto people, they'll say, well, not everybody has to eat this way, but if you have autoimmune disease, you should. And
that's ridiculous. You'll trigger it that way.
I'm not joking. That is like, I've heard that so many times, and so I just want to, while we're kind of approaching all these things, I think that might be good to talk about. Let me get your cortisol article up here. So do you?
It's actually a follow-up on another article by another group, and they haven't quoted each other, which to me is usually a corroboration that the idea is true. At least on the right path. And I posted an article maybe back in 2015 on the forum, and it showed that during stress, basically, there are these cellular fragments that increase, their number increases in the bloodstream. And for a long time, medicine thought that it's just a harmless debris, right? I mean, that's what cortisol does. It shreds your muscle tissues, your skin, connective tissue, because it's used as a fuel. To generate glucose in the liver through the process of gluconeogenesis. So now whether you like gluconeogenesis or not, the medicine said, okay, well, I mean, that's the price you pay when cortisol is high to feed you. You're gonna have some debris in your bloodstream, right? As it turns out, that debris itself is not benign at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a stress signal, a very potent one, and it was indistinguishable in terms of ability to activate the HPA axis. It was indistinguishable than the stress peptide released by the brain called CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. And it was the fragments of mitochondria and other cellular fragments that were actually shown to be able to bind and activate specific receptors. So they were acting exactly like hormones, and as a result, the body interpreted. I forget the exact quote, but something along the lines of that. If the level of these debris in your blood exceed a certain level, the body behaves as identically as if you have a severe viral infection.
Mm-hmm.
So it triggers the same inflammatory pathways. It increases nitric oxide because that's what the body increases, trying to get rid of the pathogen, bacteria or virus. It doesn't matter. It increases serotonin, right? So all of these things, because cellular debris in the bloodstream is interpreted as a stress signal, as it should. I mean, now when we think about it, doesn't it make perfect sense? That's the signal for the entire body that some part of you is disintegrating. Now, what also happens as a result is that the way these cellular debris are being cleared up is by forming antibodies for them, right? And then on tests, it looks as if your body is attacking a specific gland or tissue, while in reality, it's only trying to get rid of whatever fragments of that gland or tissue are already in the bloodstream. So, and cortisol does that, right? So stress through cortisol is capable of increasing the levels of debris in the bloodstream. Now, this new study found that actually you can even find an entire intact mitochondria in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, many of them, right? So they're not just fragments. And the mitochondria itself are capable of triggering the entire inflammatory cascade, which we know PUFA is also capable of triggering. So they increased all of the pro-inflammatory interleukins, I think 1, 6, and 12, and they also increased the activity of the enzymes cyclooxygenase and lipoxygenase, which produce the prostaglandins and leukotrienes from, of course, arachidonic acid, another PUFA, right? So that's and again, mitochondria has no place in the blood unless a cell has disintegrated. The two things that can disintegrate a cell, actually three in the body, is a viral attack, bacterial attack, or cortisol. So when you're withholding carbs, what you're doing is increasing systemically the levels of cortisol. And not only that, but like I said, the body adapts. It actually upregulates the expression of the enzyme 11-beta-HSD1, which synthesizes the active version, the cortisol, and it also decreases the expression of 11-beta-HSD2, which deactivates cortisol. So you're setting yourself up for chronic hypercortisolemia. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, so cortisol basically by going low carb, you'll end up recreating the stress response. But cortisol itself is also immunosuppressing, right? So you will actually invite these opportunistic viruses and bacteria. And on top of that, some of them are part of your DNA. They're the retroviruses. Those get activated by estrogen and cortisol. So by going low carb, you will not only be recreating the stress response, you'll be inviting all of these pathogens that are now doctors are claiming are the very cause of autoimmune disease. Now, if you go to look at Crohn's disease, now they're saying it's caused by a specific type of I think it's called Mycobacterium paratuberculosis. Now, it's already known to be caused by this bacteria in animals. Now they're like still wishy-washy, like, should we admit it's also causing this in humans or not? Anyways, it's going that way. Multiple sclerosis. It's thought to be caused by either the JC virus or the Epstein-Barr virus. Several blood cancers are thought to be caused by these viruses, right? So even if you believe in the official, I still think the virus is they're just a bystander. They're just a sign that you're being under stress, right? The primary cause would be cortisol and these cellular debris. But even if you believe in the official version of what's causing potentially autoimmune conditions, you have every reason not to go low carb, because it's the increasing cortisol that may initially make you feel better because it's lowering systemic inflammation, but it's setting you up for so much more worse in the long run because it will start shredding tissue, because it will start triggering these autoimmune reactions, because it will start activating these retroviruses, especially things like HIV, which I think Ray talks in one of his articles that the hepatitis viruses are most certainly endogenous. They're just triggered by stress, right? The hepatitis A, B, and C. And I think there's Duisberg's work showed that about 0.5% of the population natively, like endogenously, already has the antibodies for HIV. So all of this is known to happen as a result of stress. HIV is known to progress into AIDS as a result of endotoxin and or stress. So every time you expose yourself to low carb and you're increasing your cortisol, you're doing like a double damage, right? I mean, it's like you're suppressing your immune system, which prevents them from dealing with these pathogens, and you're also causing the stress response independently because of the breakdown of tissues.
Ray and I talked about an interesting story about Fort Detrick and the creation of HIV, but we won't get into that. So do I have this right? Like a cell can kill itself by apoptosis, and that wouldn't necessarily be stressful, but like the inappropriate destruction of a cell and it releasing its debris into the blood, and something that could, or basically everything associated with stress causes the influx of calcium into cells. And then I have a paper brought up here, but it's by Fujita, 1991, and he says all cell death is characterized by an increase of intracellular calcium, and then that turns on nitric oxide, and so again, this is kind of something we talk about a lot here is calcium and how dietary calcium restrains the activation of the parathyroid hormone and other hormones that cause the influx of calcium into cells.
So the proper apoptosis actually depends almost entirely on intracellular pH. So anytime the cell cannot commit apoptosis if the intracellular pH is above a certain level. In other words, the exact opposite of what currently the oncology department claims. So not department, but the industry. So your cell becomes cancerous if it becomes too alkaline. This is like it doesn't require any genes. It's every cell in the body is capable of doing that. The reason this happens usually is because something is increasing the activity of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. And another reason is if the cell is overproducing lactic acid, because the cell considers that lactic acid as a toxin, it's pumping it out of itself, which drops the extracellular pH, so your blood is more acidic, but the cells itself that are under stress are alkaline. So while they're in that state, these cells are indistinguishable from cancer cells, even metabolically. And now this brings us to the study which we thought we're not going to discuss, but I guess I have to say it. Now, the one study that I posted maybe 2-3 days ago showed that lactate is an oncometabolite. Lactate acid itself, without any other interference from anywhere, is capable of activating all of the known major oncogenes, suppressing all of the known tumor suppressor genes, right? And in general, increasing cell proliferation and dedifferentiation. So that's all that's required. Systemic acidosis or systemic intracellular alkalinity is all that is required for cancer to develop. There's no mystery to it. All the mutations, all of the derangements that are known to happen in advanced stages of cancer, all of these are after the fact. It's really the metabolic derangement of the cell that is the original signal. So apoptosis, if you want your cells that are becoming abnormal and are trying to ruin the party, so to speak, if you want them to be capable of recognizing how abnormal they are and getting rid of stem cells, make sure you drop the intracellular pH, and that happens by raising carbon dioxide production mainly. That calcium can also do it because it increases metabolism, right? I think magnesium is also known to do it because it increases the activity of pyruvate dehydrogenase, which is usually the rate limiting factor for synthesis for entry of the Krebs cycle and consequently synthesis of carbon dioxide. The carbonic anhydrase inhibitor acetazolamide is known in vitro at this point, at least, to have effect against every cancer type that has been tried so far. And they're saying we don't know why, but that's one explanation. It rapidly drops the intracellular pH, and that's a signal for an abnormal cell to kill itself. Regular one will happily proceed and continue to produce carbon dioxide and and maintain itself and its apparatus. But if the cell cannot produce carbon dioxide, the next step is dismantling the mitochondrial deoxyribonucleic phosphorylation apparatus, and then that's it. After that, from that to cancer is just only one step.
Aqua Vitae actually brought up a question that I was just about to riff on. He says, or they say, if only there was a fuel source that did not make lactic acid when it was metabolized. And so this is a common argument that the use of free fatty acids, because it bypasses glycolysis, will lead to less lactic acid. But I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong.
It does not.
Correct me if I'm
It interferes, because it interferes with the oxidation of glucose. Basically, all of that glucose will be wasted. Now, yes, if you ingest carbs, some of that will get converted to lactate, but it only if you're in a reduced state, right? So it's the redox status that controls it all. And unfortunately, when you're oxidizing fats, almost any glucose that you're intaking will get converted to lactic acid because it cannot get metabolized. So because of the Randall cycle, and because the redox state will be moved towards reduction, the Randall cycle, I think I sent you that link, it's on Wikipedia. It lowers the NAD to the NADH ratio. In other words, there will be an accumulation of NADH, and whenever that happens, the body needs an emergency oxidant, and it will use pyruvate, which is coming from glucose. So if you're only eating fat and metabolizing fat, and you're relying on ketosis, you still have glucose in your body. I mean, actually, that's when the liver starts pumping out a lot of glucose through gluconeogenesis. Because of the cortisol and all the amino acids flooding the liver has to convert it to something. It doesn't like them floating in the bloodstream, so it will convert almost all of them to glucose, and all of that glucose will be wasted and get turned into lactate.
I was going to say that was the main thing. They were not considering that their body is still making the glucose, and then the decrease in carbon dioxide and the basically creating the Warburg effect, because there's oxygen around. Because of the carbon dioxide, they're just going to convert it into lactic acid. And if I just a few days ago, I did like Reddit ketosis, lactic acid, and you can just find many threads talking about people that feel increasingly sore muscles upon starting ketosis, and that's not incontrovertible proof or anything. But I did put up an article about brain doubling the amount of lactic acid in the brain, ketosis and things. So, have you ever seen?
And for the people that have, because I always hear an example. Well, but ketosis is shown to work for epilepsy. Yeah, but only if it's done with short-chain fatty acids and or saturated fats, long-chain saturated fats. It does not work if you ingest corn oil. Try to go on ketosis on corn oil, and you'll see how you'll get much worse seizures than before. This was tried and several times, and there's a reason why they don't use it anymore in the clinic. So this whole thing about ketosis may very well turn out to be because of the anti-stress pro-GABA effects of saturated fat and some of the short-chain fatty acids.
That's something I've thought about of whether like ketogenic people that intake exogenous ketones do better than people that are just kind of all natural. And because if they were to get a source of acetoacetate, they would be kind of maybe possibly mitigating some of the effects of the ketone body ratio and the beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate.
Right. But also some of the short-chain fatty acids, there's a drug called valproic acid. Mm-hmm. So it's sold usually as a sodium salt. Mm-hmm. And I think it's basically closely related to valeric acid. So these are short-chain fatty acids, and they're known to be basically potent GABA agonists. So these anti-epileptic effects that people are seeing from the keto diets, they only, first of all, I want to emphasize, they only occur if you're using short-chain fatty acids, which are the saturated ones, and or long-chain saturated fatty acids. They do not occur if you ingest corn oil, canola oil, or any of the other vegetable oils that are high on linoleic acid. So it's not really the ketosis here it suggests that it's not the ketosis that's the benefit. It's something about the fat itself, the type of fat that you're using.
Sweet. Okay, let's take a mini break here. Subscribe if you're new here. Appreciate that. Like I've said many times, I strongly believe that this channel has hit some keywords that cause it to be like shadow banned in some capacity. So
probably, yeah.
You probably need to subscribe to get the content here. please like the stream. That really helps out. And then leave a comment, and you'll be entered into the Tokovit Idea Labs weekly giveaway. And we'll talk about that in a second. idealabsdc.com, Georgi's boutique supplement company. Go check that out. Follow Georgi on Twitter at hateit.com, at hateit. I do coaching, and you can check that out at dannyroddy.com/resources. This is the only way I fund all of this, and I've been doing this for a long time, and there are plenty of opportunities to do lots of different things to make lots of different revenue, and I'm not saying that people that do that, I'm not saying anything about that, but this is the way I feel like is kind of allows me to keep objectivity is just people paying me for my time and coaching, and so that's how I like to earn a living. And you can find that at dannyroddy.com/resources. And you can follow me at Twitter at dannyroddy, and I have an Instagram. Georgi, anything else?
I was just looking at the valproic acid.
Yeah.
I just wanted to confirm what I said and say I was right this time, 100%. So valproic acid, which is one of the most established drugs for treating epilepsy, and they're saying that proposed mechanism of action is probably GABA, increasing the GABA levels. It's synthesized from valeric acid, which is another name for pentanoic acid. So it's a short-chain fatty acid. Butanoic acid, butyric acid, also known as butyric acid, is another one that's known to increase GABA levels or at least act as a GABA agonist. It's also histone deacetylase inhibitor. The latter one, the butyric one, that's why it's so useful for cancer. So really, the evidence that I've seen so far suggests that the benefits of ketosis are not because of the ketosis, as when it comes to epilepsy. It's because of the signaling effects and the fact that these are short-chain saturated fatty acids or long-chain saturated fatty acids. The studies that I've seen with vegetable oils high on PUFA, they do not produce good results. They can cause even death.
Well, speaking of, did you want to talk about the thing that you had posted, like America's favorite oil?
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
So that was actually pretty. It was a pretty brave statement, I thought, because it's coming out of I forgot which university. Some university did the study, and they actually showed that soy oil, which at this point is the favorite oil in America for pretty much any commercially cooked food, directly causes diabetes and obesity. And they actually, on top of that, they found out that it is linoleic acid that's causing this. So I don't know how you can get it any clearer than that. The only criticism that I've heard so far, based on when I posted this, because whenever I post something on my blog, it shows up on Twitter. The only criticism that I heard so far is that it's in mice and they have a different metabolism for the PUFAs. And I looked into that, and it looks like the mice only have a different metabolism for the very long chain fats, basically chain length of 20 or more. That's not linoleic acid. So we're talking about a chain of 18. So to me that study still stands. I've emailed the authors. Let's see if they respond or not. But basically, if you look at the statements of those researchers, they said, if I were you, because the interviewer said, so what is the takeaway from the study? And they said, too early to say, but if you ask us, we will do everything possible to avoid soy oil. But I would go a step further. If they prove that it's the linoleic acid that's causing this, then you should be avoiding any oil that contains it in large amounts.
Mm-hmm. I have the quote here: avoiding conventional soybean oil as much as possible.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
but here's the other thing: what's conventional soybean oil? They also tried a high oleic version, but they also basically that also had slightly less worse, right? So it's less bad, but still, coconut oil did the best, and I think that's because that link is also there in that post, because they also and now I don't know if I took that quote, I don't know, but basically that's in the second study where they tested coconut oil. That same guy who said avoid conventional soybean oil as much as possible, he also said he's already switched to using coconut oil for most of his cooking. So he didn't say do it, but that's what he's doing.
I loved this. Have you seen it's called Omega-6 Apocalypse by Chris A. Knob? It was kind of floating around maybe a few months ago. Did you happen to watch it? It's like a YouTube video.
Was it like a YouTube video? Yeah.
I think it was like phenomenally done. And it's nothing you haven't heard before, but I just thought it was like a simple presentation. But he, sorry, I played the sound. Anyways, if you type in Chris Knob and Danny Roddy in Twitter, I put it I did like a super cut of the whole presentation talking about. He says there's been no dietary change that's been as great as the introduction of the vegetable and seed oils. It's just astronomical. Like there's that paper I'm sure we've talked about from 1909 to 1999 that soybean oil has increased 1,000%. And then he goes into just mechanisms as well, and he just says the same thing that Ray's been saying for years. The cytochrome C oxidase and the inhibition of mitochondrial respiration, lipid peroxidation. Did I say cardiolipin already? Like it's just well done, and he's saying it in a very non-technical way. And I don't think people appreciate how. Again, I don't know if anybody knows the optimal amount of polyunsaturated fats in the diet or anything, but how low it is, like how low it might be, maybe, under 4 or around 2 grams. It's like so ridiculously difficult to do for a lot of people. And I'll regularly get, people will send me what they're eating, and it will be like 20, 30, 40 grams of the polyunsaturated fats per day. And just being in Asia, you start to appreciate like how every single food is fried on the street food and things. And in Japan, when I would go out at night, there would be these long lines to 7-Elevens of kids waiting to get like their fried food, and it's just like crazy to think about. So, and again, that type of fat you've been eating being stored in your body fat, and that being kind of a vicious cycle and being difficult to get out of as well.
Yeah, because it's preferentially stored. Saturated fat gets preferentially oxidized. So, and then conversely, when you're doing lipolysis, so when you're eating fat, whatever the composition of it is, like the saturated one tends to get oxidized first, and then the PUFA gets stored, right? So then when you're doing lipolysis, for most people, that means you're bathing mostly in PUFA. Mm-hmm. So you have to eat like saturated fat for a while, primarily because it's so easily oxidized preferentially, in order to change the composition of the fatty tissue. Mm-hmm. But there's some human studies that show that if you rub vitamin E on your on the areas that have a lot of fat, or you rub stearic acid, which is a 18 carbon chain long fatty acid, the saturated equivalent of linoleic acid, you can actually change the composition of the fatty tissue much faster. And you can prevent a lot of the bad effects of lipolysis.
Sweet. And speaking of vitamin E, the winner from the ID Labs giveaway, and this is all because of Georgi being so gracious to ship out and send people free vitamin E, and thank you for that, Georgi, is Sofronios. And so you left a very nice comment. And so please email me at danny@dannyroddy.com, and we'll get you set up with Idea Labs Tokovit. Is that on your main page, Georgi?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay. I won't click. I know that goes to the form. Okay, hour 20. I know it's late there, not very early, but early in the morning for me. Do you want to get to some Super Chats?
Super Chats, sure.
Okay, let's do that. Let me switch here. How's everybody in the chat doing? I see a spirited debate going on for some carnivore advocates. I said in the video that I made that I think an equal amount of people are not going to be carnivore because it certainly fits a fad, Like, I don't know if you're paying attention, but like Joe Rogan talked about the carnivore diet, then Jordan Peterson was on the carnivore diet. So it's just kind of really taken YouTube by storm. And then all these people are...
one thing I wanted to mention about the carnivore diets. Yeah. Keep in mind, because they draw comparisons to try to explain it evolutionary as well.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that if you're eating freshly killed meat, it has a very high content of glycogen and vitamin C. So even though it may sound like you're eating low carb diet, right? You're actually ingesting a significant amount of carbs. Mm-hmm. And it's only the aged meats that are starting to decay, and then the carbs have already been processed by bacteria and turned into lactic acid. Those are the ones that basically like we're eating nowadays. But really, parallels should not be drawn between us and traditional cultures that are eating mostly meat, because those people, they don't really store the meat. They kill the animal, they eat it within like a day or two. So if you're doing that, you're actually ingesting a significant amount of glycogen with the carbs, with the protein, to the tune of potentially at least 1-to-1 ratio. So if you're eating like a good steak that's like, I don't know, half a pound, you're probably getting like maybe a few hundred grams of carbs as well if that's a fresh steak. So to me, the argument about carnivore being low carb and look at how good it was for our ancestors, it cannot be compared with a current carnivore diet because we're mostly eating meat that's being stored for several months. And that's basically you eating almost pure protein, endotoxin, and lactic acid.
And if people think we should mimic the diets of our ancestors, maybe they should live like them too.
Yeah, sure, exactly. So just the mimicking the diet, it's just like not enough. But go hunt for deer in the woods and live like a wild man, and then maybe it's good for you.
And of course, that's semi-ingest because it's basically impossible. Like I know I've said this story before, but I had like an EMF, like a $200 very sensitive EMF reader, and in Mexico, I was in a giant field, no houses around anywhere, and it was reading almost to the top measure. I forget the unit. It might have been like over 3.0 volts per meter, which was it's very high. And there were no houses anywhere around me. I was in an empty field, and it was from the cell towers that were like almost
exactly. I was going to say cell towers.
I almost couldn't even see them, how far they were. And so it's just like
or long distance power lines. Like that's the only two. Some of them are underground.
Well,
so you don't even know about.
You're probably right. That would be not RF though, right? The radio frequency.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it's just like you're being bombarded with stuff that you never asked for. It's not even up for debate whether you want to be exposed to the RF.
And I just saw an ad on TV in the United States that T-Mobile apparently already has like a 5G network.
Well.
And I'm going to start to look. There's these websites that are popping up that are basically because they don't like 5G, right? You saw the post that I said that it basically said we don't know if 5G is safe at all. Mm-hmm. So some European states have banned it, at least the deployment of it. But long story short, I'm pretty sure that DC is probably going to be spearheading the 5G effort. So I'm starting to look for ways to identify where most of the toxic exposure would be.
Well, 5G is in Bangkok. It's in a lot of the routers, and so we won't get into why I'm still here. But like it is, I'm sure it's super saturated where I am at the moment. Like I always go in and I plug in Ethernet and I go to the admin and the password and I turn off the radios, but it doesn't matter because all my neighbors and things have them. But anyways, that I thought 5G was coming, and when I lived in Mexico, we the whole street got new internet service, and all the routers were 5G, and I was like, "What? Wait, it's coming! It's like here already." And then the same is true for here.
I mean, the technology is here, but you have to. It's a matter of deployment because of the higher frequency. You'll need to place a lot more antennas per So let's say you'll need basically an antenna per block, if not even more dense than that, right? So now they're starting to come up with ways to put these on street light poles, and the only reason they haven't done it yet because that provides almost like a perfect, deployment framework, right? So they're afraid people will steal them because they will be exposed. And it will be expensive equipment. You'll basically have like a pretty nice router with some nice parts in it. So they haven't figured out. That's the only reason why it hasn't been deployed. But so yeah, 5G technology is here, but it hasn't been deployed yet because the infrastructure you require is starting to deploy a lot more of these antennas, and that's what's going to take time and money. And some states are blocking it. I mean, like some European states, especially Switzerland, has voted against it. They don't like it.
Awesome. Okay, this first super chat is actually from Casper. Last time we did this, but he says both Danny and both you guys, Danny and Georgi, have you gone through very bad health? Did you experience authoritative behavior in that time?
My goodness, that's most of the reason I'm here. I mean, I experienced such bad health during the 2009-2011 period that. Since then, I've gave up completely on medicine, not because they were helpless, but because I experienced firsthand just how easily they would lie in your face and how corrupt the profession has become to the point of all they want to do from you is label you, throw you into the system, and you follow rules and you consume as many drugs as possible, do as many procedures as possible, and not ask as few questions as possible. Even though I never got an official diagnosis from any of these doctors. So yeah, I mean, I've experienced some serious health issues. Knock on wood, I think they're gone, right? And right now, the only time I'll consider going to the doctor is if, God forbid, I get into an accident. I need antibiotics that I don't have myself already, or there's some kind of a requirement that I can't go around. I mean, basically, I'm an immigrant in the United States, and some of these immigrational procedures require you going to the doctor and getting examined. They don't want psychos coming into the country. And I said, too late, already here.
Yeah, and my friend, I think I've mentioned this in my interview with Matt Blackburn, but I viewed myself as like a terror, like somebody that only wanted to argue, impose my point of view on people, and so when Ray started talking about authoritarianism, I was like, holy shit, that's like me in a nutshell. Yeah. And so yeah. I think not only becoming aware of those things, but then realizing that your physiology is involved in kind of like orienting you to that type of behavior, and then also seeing it in other people, like especially if you're with somebody and they haven't eaten for a long time and they get like more aggressive and more aggressive as time goes on. It's just like it's just very noticeable. And so yeah, I mean, Ray is the guy that opened my mind to that the authoritarian persona and the serotonin connection and things. And so, again, I'm not immune to not being that way, but I think it's easier for me to maintain an even keel and not be so stupid.
That's actually one of the things that still gives me hopes for humanity in general, is that I was also like I said, I was in a pretty bad shape, and I was probably in a very authoritarian state myself. And the fact that I was capable of still keeping an open mind and being open to raise ideas, right, and investigating and learning for myself shows me that even if you're in a very compromised health or mind-wise, right, there's some part of you, I guess at some point you may lose it, right, if you become a complete psychopath. But to the very end, there seems to be this ability of humans to incorporate new ideas into their mindset. And as long as that's true, I think there's still hope for the world. It's about, if we become completely roboticized and we only follow rules, if we get to that point, then I don't know. There's not much hope after that.
I'm trying to find it, but I think Roger said that. Oh, here it is. Let me switch views real fast. He said on Becoming a Person, he said, one of the most revolutionary concepts to grow out of our clinical experience is that growing recognition that the innermost core of man's nature, ... the base of his animal nature is positive in nature, is basically socialized, forward-moving, rational, and realistic. And then he has other quotes where he says that...
Say it again? It's removing rational and realistic?
The base of his animal nature is positive in nature, is basically socialized, forward-moving, rational, and realistic. And so, and he has another quote where he says that can be buried upon layer of like encrusted defense mechanisms and culture and things like that. But I think you're right, because I often think like why was I receptive to Ray's stuff when I was like so horrendously sick? And it was really based on experience and being so cold all the time, and that being like this terrible symptom that nobody was talking about. That I felt like Matt Stone, who was one of the people that introduced me to Ray, was really one of the only people talking about it. So,
yeah, I think if something threatens you in terms of, as a concept, you're very likely tired and or somehow low on energy. I've noticed that the only time I start feeling defensive about some ideas, even if it's like right now when I'm feeling fine, I would gladly listen to somebody who has something to say about poo being good for you, right? And like proposing studies and whatnot. It would actually entertain me, and I would try to see this person's point. If I'm tired, cranky, feeling sick or whatnot, that would not fly well. Yeah. I mean, like that at that point, I'm actually becoming a Peterian authoritarian. So yeah, I mean, I think just like Ray said, like the basis of human nature, of human consciousness, is empathy. So if you start feeling like you're starting to lose some of your empathy, that's the first signal that energetic reserves are are going down. Like you need to restore them. If you start feeling like, oh, these people deserve their fate, or like, oh, like they were bad people, that's what should have. That's whenever you start feeling like that towards your fellow people, chances are you need your sugary drink.
I love it. Okay, Kirk 333 for $2. Thank you so much, Kirk. He says, is extremistane in 3 milligram dose safe for long-term use?
Exemestane in 3 milligrams?
Yeah.
In 3 milligrams?
Yeah, and just to say, we're not giving medical advice here.
Yeah, exactly. No, I can only I can only quote the studies that I've seen. Right. So according to the studies that I've seen, taking exemestane in dosages higher than 10 milligrams daily does not provide more benefit in terms of lowering estrogen. So the clinically used dosage is usually 25 milligrams a day, but exemestane has a very long half-life, about 48 hours. So you don't need to take it every day. On top of that, anything more than 10 milligrams is already not providing you with any benefit. Fortunately, the studies that I've seen, human and animal, have shown that using 10 milligrams or less daily doesn't really produce much of side effects. I mean, they looked at liver function, kidney function, hematology, basically like they did complete blood count. So other than increasing testosterone and lowering estrogen, the 10 milligrams or lower seemed to be pretty safe. I emphasize seemed, because the studies lasted for only 2 months, for only a few months. Now there are long-term studies with females taking exemestane for breast cancer, and then at the very high dosage of about 25 milligrams daily, there seems to be some concern about potential impediment of liver function. But it only happened in about 10% of the women. And keep in mind, these women are with breast cancer. People with cancer typically already have liver problems. So the study didn't say whether these women had problems before or not. All it said that at the conclusion of the study, when they were drawing the blood, about 10% had elevated ALT. And it was only one of the 3 enzymes tested that was elevated. So whether 3 milligrams is safe or not, I'm legally not allowed to say. All I can say is that it should be much safer than the 10 milligrams, for which that is the maximum benefit you can get. And so far, there's nothing published in terms of this dosage causing any kind of side effects. So you're taking about 1/3 of that. So you should be even safer. Whether it's completely safe, we don't know. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So think for yourself. I know there is a way to mitigate these risks even more if you're combining with a little bit of pregnenolone, because exemestane in structure is very similar to the steroid boldenone, and most endpoint steroids tend to be suppressive of the synthesis of the precursor steroids. So and many of the mental side effects of steroid abuse have shown to be due to the fact that these androgenic steroids inhibit the production of allopregnanolone, and in the brain also progesterone and pregnenolone. So taking a little bit of pregnenolone, 5 to 10 milligrams daily, may be able to mitigate these risks even more. I hope that answers it. I would personally take it. If somebody asked me, would you take 3 milligrams of exemestane daily indefinitely? I would say yes, but I would also add 5 to 10 milligrams of pregnenolone on top of that.
I just realized our timer thing for the chat doesn't work. Very sad. Okay, it doesn't matter.
Why do you need it?
Just something I was working on. Okay, Kirk has another question. Thank you for that, Georgi. And thank you, Kirk. He said, this one's for $5. Thank you, Kirk. He says, is wheat and gluten bad for everyone? Can some people digest it, or should everyone avoid? Thank you.
I don't think the problem is with the digestibility. It's how well functioning is your gut barrier, that gut junction that's basically keeping the food and most of its components, at least the undigested or the allergenic ones like gluten, within the GI system. Once it gets into your bloodstream, almost everything becomes a very potent and dangerous allergen. And gluten itself is known to cause the appearance of antibodies for like specific organs and tissues, as if the body is basically developing an autoimmune reaction. So if you're gluten sensitive and you're eating a lot of gluten, you can actually test positive on some of the blood tests for Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. So it can cause these reactions. I don't know if it's dangerous for the same way for everybody. I know that people with compromised gut barrier, especially people like which is mostly controlled by the way by estrogen. So if you're drinking alcohol, which is typically the agent most commonly involved in compromised gut barriers, eating a lot of wheat and or gluten will probably not sit well with you. If estrogen is kept under control and the gut barrier is well functioning, then it's probably not as dangerous. But even in very healthy people, some gluten tends to get into the blood, and studies have shown that even in 20-year-olds, when they eat like a heavy wheat-based meal afterwards, they have elevated white blood cell count and some of the inflammatory interleukins. So even for them, it seems like the body doesn't like it very much.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Kirk. Prehensile penis for $2 says, "What are I don't even know what that means. What are some PD things to do to fix back pain?"
You remember I posted a study about 2 months ago. Pregnenolone is now considered by the military, U.S. military, as a drug with tremendous potential for treating low back pain and in general back pain. And now they think Department of Defense thinks that low back pain is simply a sign of endotoxemia. So they demonstrated in a study funded by the Department of Defense that pregnenolone is a potent inhibitor of TLR4 and TLR2 expression. So by taking that or any other chemical that inhibits the activity of this receptor or inhibits the synthesis of endotoxin or the present in the blood, you can actually treat low back pain. Incidentally, there are studies with the antibiotic minocycline, and it shows that it actually alleviates chronic back pain. Of course, it has an antibiotic effect, but it's capable of doing that even in dosages that are not known to have a bactericidal effect. So 20 to 50 milligrams daily is enough to apparently relieve back pain. And the fact that it works through the TLR4, in other words, the endotoxin receptor, without killing the bacteria to the level of actually reducing endotoxin, is that it's been shown that minocycline also reduces chronic pain triggered by opioid addiction withdrawal. And opioids now are known to be one of the most potent agonist chemicals of TLR4. So they act almost exactly like endotoxin. So when you're taking opioids, while you're taking them, you feel fine. I mean, you're blissful. There's no pain, right? The moment you stop, the pain is actually upregulated, and these opioids can actually create something called phantom pain. So you're starting to feel pain in various parts of the body, even though they're perfectly well functioning. The reason is that activation of the TLR4 receptor. Minocycline happens to be a TLR4 antagonist, and also it can even, in higher dosage, can actually make that receptor start to disintegrate. So minocycline and other TLR4 antagonists like the tricyclic antidepressants, the nortriptyline, I think amitriptyline are like the most common ones used. Benadryl is another one. Cyproheptadine, of course. All of these chemicals that are known to block TLR4 and serotonin, histamine, they're also involved in chronic pain. They also have studies behind them showing that they help for chronic back pain and in general, any chronic pain that doesn't seem to be relieved by painkillers. So pregnenolone is the first thing I would try. I think the dosage that they used was equivalent to about 100 milligrams daily for a human. And then I don't see a reason why not combine it with Benadryl just to make it even more effective, or cyproheptadine or minocycline, or even all three combined. I don't think they interact in a bad way.
To tag along on what you said, there was actually a nutritionfacts.org, which is like a vegan channel, video on back pain. And I thought it was interesting because they were tying it into higher levels of cholesterol and basically like atherosclerosis in I'm not very good with anatomy, but like the arteries and veins in the back and things.
Right.
And so I interpreted that as hypothyroidism and the high level of cholesterol, and of course a decreased formation of pregnenolone. And sure enough, if you type in hypothyroidism, you'll get back pain. The one thing I would add is that's not a symptom that I've ever chronically dealt with, back pain, but I did have a like a wicked case of back pain when I was using too much T4 in relation to T3. And I don't know, I mean, I could hypothesize, but maybe the T4 was making me more hypothyroid or something, but that definitely seemed to kind of like initiate it. And so using more T3 solved that.
Yeah, actually, higher levels of cholesterol are now recognized as potentially a defensive mechanism for elevated endotoxin. Cholesterol, pregnenolone, progesterone, and other pregnanes, or cholesteins, as they call them. Cholesteins are the cholesterol molecules. There are many of them. It's not just cholesterol. It's just that the ones that share the same structure. And the pregnenes are actually capable of binding and deactivating endotoxin directly. There's a post about this on my blog. It was specifically with progesterone, but it actually said that based on the structure, they think that any pregnine will do it. And I know from previous studies that basically, like if you go to a doctor and you have high cholesterol, most of the time they will check LDL, right? And they'll say, oh, if it's high, then you have, I mean, you're at risk for heart disease, right? But we know that it's also a sign of hypothyroidism, right? But it's also, if you check HDL, if both are on the high end, that's one of the most reliable signs of elevated endotoxin, because it's HDL that carries endotoxin to the liver for deactivation, and then it's the cholesterol, it's the LDL, which is the cholesterol is carried, the regular cholesterol is carried by the LDL. That is the cholesterol that helps repair some of the inflammatory damage done by endotoxin through the TLR4 receptor. So I think if you test that, probably it's like the cheap man's endotoxin test will be the testing both cholesterol fractions and see where you stand on those. So if if both of them are elevated, I think this is a pretty decent indication that the low back pain is caused by endotoxemia.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. Thank you for that question and the $2. Cardochav, a regular. Thank you so much, Cardochav, for $4.99. They say, hey guys, have either of you tried making the potato juice protein that Ray has talked about?
Yes, I have, and I found myself that I have to basically what do you call it? Like put it through this cloth, the cheesecloth, several times so that all the starch is gone. Because I did it twice, and then the liquid looked like perfectly transparent. I was like, yes, I nailed it. It's 100% pure potato juice. But then I let it sit for a while, and it formed this like thick sediment at the bottom. And then I found out personally that in my case, I had to basically filter it 4 times before I get it to the level where there is very little noticeable starch. And I even emailed Ray about it, and he said I would filter it as many times as necessary in order to get rid of the starch, because he's like the beauty and the benefit. Like he said, the benefit of the potato protein juice soup is really the fact that it's almost entirely keto acids and carbs, and it has basically no starch in it. So for somebody with a very compromised health state, which is when he usually recommends eating that potato protein soup, you want as little starch and hopefully none if possible.
I've never made it before, so I couldn't comment. But that's very interesting. Thank you.
It's pretty easy to make. It's just you have to be careful. I mean, you have to do several filterings depending on the sieve that you have, because it's that starch. The particles are really really fine. I mean, you're going to take a lot of filtering before you can get to a point where. So the test for me is leaving the liquid undisturbed for like 30 minutes. So if there's any starch in it, within 30 minutes, it tends to already cover the bottom. And then anything more than the finger thickness, I think is to me is unacceptable. I found that it irritated my stomach if you had more than that.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Cardo Chav, and thanks for all the super chats. We got so many people that do super chats every week, so sincerely appreciate it. This one's from Priya 100 for $5, no message. Thank you so much, Priya. Jerry B for $5. Thanks, Jerry. He says, I'm on prednisone for my active ulcerative colitis flare. It worked right away. How does prednisone work? What's the damage if and what should I do to recover?
Depends on the dosage, really. I mean, sometimes they will put people on high dosage in order to induce remission very quickly. When it's used for periods of like 1 week to 10 days, which is what they normally do for they call it acute exacerbation, then I think it's relatively benign. But still, if it's very high dosage, it may cause It may precipitate something called adrenal insufficiency. That's pretty nasty because once you stop the prednisone, you feel like absolutely crap. You can even go into a shock actually if you're not careful about it. Hopefully you're not that case. If there are also like people where there are cases where they prescribe prednisone orally in a much smaller doses. It's called the Medrol pack. That I think is more benign, but it tends to be prescribed on a chronic basis, and then that can also suppress your adrenals. And ultimately, really, the damage from cortisol is twofold. One, even though it suppresses inflammation, which is how it really helps the ulcerative colitis, it does suppress the inflammation. It allows the lesions to heal. However, it suppresses your immune system, and just as we discussed earlier, it actually exacerbates the conditions that allow for the autoimmune condition to happen to start with, right? It's going to cause that rupturing of cells and leakage of the mitochondria and other cell fragments in the bloodstream, and that will, in the long run, unless you're taking cortisol, throughout this entire time, which is I wouldn't advise, because it's going to, shred your muscles, shred your tissue, shred your bones, cause depression, potentially even diabetes and insulin resistance. All of these are known side effects of cortisol. Type prednisone side effects in Google, and you'll get them all, but they're pretty well known. I mean, it's premature aging is what I will sum them up as. In fact, Ray has a quote saying that every single sign/symptom of aging can be produced in an organism regardless of the age if you administer sufficiently high dosage of cortisol for sufficiently long. So if it's a high dose, I would only take it for about a week. If it's the lower dose and it's prescribed chronically, I would ask the doctor to taper it off and replace with something safer like pregnenolone or progesterone. I don't know if that person who asked the question knows, but pregnenolone was used for autoimmune conditions back in the 40s and 50s. It was most commonly used for rheumatoid arthritis, but it also showed some success for lupus and for psoriasis as well. And I don't know of any study for ulcerative colitis specifically, but since it's already also considered an autoimmune condition, and pregnenolone was thought to work similarly to cortisol but without the side effects, I would think it would be lovely if pregnenolone works, because you can take it in any dose you want, and it won't cause any of these issues that cortisol causes, even in low doses.
Sweet. Thank you so much for that, Jerry. Pure Therapy for $24.99 with no message. Thank you so much, Pure Therapy, just continually supporting the live stream. So thank you for that. Gabriel Terauchi, hopefully I'm not butchering that, $10. Thank you so much, Gabriel. He says, on many ingredients labels, natural flavors is included as an ingredient. Can you guys discuss what the label covers? Are any problematic substances classified as natural flavors?
Not to my knowledge. Most of these are usually like things like vanilla or like citrus flavor or like limonene. Lavender is potentially a problem, even though it's a natural flavor, depending on exactly what they took from the lavender plant and put it in there. Recent studies came out showing that lavender is a strong endocrine disruptor in terms of being a very strong, potent androgen antagonist. It caused basically hermaphroditism in fetuses when they were exposed even to very minor concentrations for a month or so. So I would definitely not use lavender products on pregnant women. And it doesn't matter if they're ingested or if they're in soaps. It's very commonly used in soaps, the lavender, and in shampoos. But most of the others are fine, I think. And the most commonly used ones are usually vanilla and citrus because those happen to be the most popular flavors. I don't think the natural flavor category allows, at least by law, to include all of the dangerous flavors that are known, and the dangerous colorings like the red 6 or like the yellow 4 or whatever the FDA defines. So if it says natural flavors, it's typically benign. But keep in mind, the problem is that the label is often not required to list things that appear in sufficiently small quantities. So I found out that the best approach is to email the vendor, and once you start asking the detailed questions, they usually respond because they're afraid of being sued. So if you start asking things like, does your category natural flavors include endocrine disruptors, and you list some of them like lavender, you can say lavender, right? Then they're usually pretty open about it and come back and say they may try to like sugarcoat it and say, oh yeah, it includes a tiny amount, right? But then you already know. If you rely only on the label, of course they're gonna list the minimum that's allowed by law. And in many cases, like if it's less than 1 gram per serving, which most of the natural flavors are, they're usually used in microgram quantities or even lower because it's such a potent flavor. They're not going to be listed on the label. I mean, so they get covered under the natural flavor label. And again, I think most of these are safe, but just to be sure, because I've done it myself. So far, the vendors that I've emailed, when I started mentioning things like endocrine disruptors, they provided me with a lot of data that was nowhere to be found on their websites.
Yeah, being in traveling in Thailand, there are like a bunch of really great looking juices that are available. And I've tried some of them, and it took me like a week to figure out that they were like powerful irritants. And
Yeah,
so, and of course, there's nothing, no red flags on the labels. It's just like
yeah.
100% juice. And so it can be a minefield, I think. And I mentioned this in videos, but I think when somebody is getting into repeat or whatever, and they're leaning into the foods he's talking about, it's like some of the most adulterated foods. I feel like, for example, the fruit juice and sometimes milk and
Yeah.
stuff, and so it can be very very difficult, especially if a person has some digestive issue. And so that just speaks to the poor food quality, that we're all exposed to. So thank you so much, Gabriel. Sincerely appreciate that. Ellie says, and thank you so much, Ellie. He says, I get a massive headache on 1 drop methylene blue a day in OJ after about a week of use. I eat it away from cheese liver. Any tips to mitigate that?
It may be due to, for some reason, chronically downregulated monoamine oxidase type A function of the enzyme. So, methylene blue is known to be an inhibitor as well, but by itself shouldn't be causing this. So, you may be doing something else or having this downregulated for a different reason. Typically, people under stress have a chronically downregulated enzyme, monoamine type oxidase type A. So, and that results in a buildup of serotonin. I would try to take the methylene blue together with some riboflavin, which is vitamin B2, because that is actually a cofactor for that enzyme that degrades serotonin. And actually, incidentally, riboflavin is used as a treatment for headaches. And it happens to synergize with methylene blue in terms of an oxidizing agent and being able to shift the redox balance back to the oxidative side. So no more than 10 to 15 milligrams per dose and per day, because just like methylene blue, if you take more riboflavin than that and then get exposed to light, you're basically getting the equivalent of photodynamic therapy, which is its goal is to kill cancer cells by creating a tremendous amount of reactive oxygen species. So if you're taking with methylene blue, try in the afternoon, or at the very least, don't get exposed to sunlight for the next few hours.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Ellie. Christopher J for $10. No message. Thank you so much, Christopher. Sincerely appreciate it. John Raven for £5. Thanks so much, John. He says, let me expand this. 2 weeks ago, my uncle was diagnosed with prostate cancer on one side, currently doing radiation, ... Any tips for him are very welcome. You guys rock. Thanks, John.
The first tip would have been for me, given the prostate cancer. I mean, even nowadays, most oncologists will recommend not doing anything. I don't know why the oncologist talked him into doing something. So before they do therapy, they try to do a biopsy. And they have these aggressiveness scale from 1 to 10, and typically they would only push for treatment if the cancer's aggressiveness grade is 8 or above. I don't know if that was the case for him. If it was not the case, if this biopsy wasn't done, or if it was done and the cancer is below 8, I would actually seriously consider talking to the doctor and saying, like, we don't want to do anything. We want to do the watchful waiting, which in most countries around the world is approved as actually a legitimate, not treatment, but it's considered perfectly acceptable medically, and with a better outcome, long-term outcome than treatment. Because in a small percentage of cases, they're not going to tell you that the cancer comes back much more aggressive, and at that point they treat it as a castration-resistant prostate cancer, and they start administering really toxic chemotherapeutic drugs, which tend to kill the patient from heart failure or kidney failure or both. In terms of supportive measures from peatland, I would focus on aspirin and progesterone. That would be my go-to methods for this kind of cancer. I would also do some tests for hormones and see how those stand. And vitamin D is invariably low in prostate cancer, and it happens to synergize with progesterone because vitamin D is a steroid. I keep repeating that because most people don't consider it a steroid. It's a steroid, and it's shown to be capable of augmenting the effects of progesterone and androgens, while at the same time reducing the effects of estrogen and cortisol at the receptors. And it's estrogen really that at this point is pretty clear that's the actual cause of prostate cancer. It's not the androgens. I mean, I'm hoping that I'll have a study, at least the report, to send you from that study that I'm doing with dihydrotestosterone, which should not convince, but should irritate his doctor and make them reconsider the approach, because it looks like it will show that dihydrotestosterone is actually therapeutic. So yeah, progesterone and aspirin and vitamin D if it's low.
Yeah, and John, check out Ray's article specifically on prostate cancer, where he echoes a lot of the things Georgi just said, like thyroid supplementation, complete nutrition, and yeah, like Georgi said, the vitamin D. I think those would all be really useful. Thank you so much, John. Let me switch back views here. Georgi, how you doing?
I'm all right, tired, but
okay,
still there.
I'm also tired. We're almost done here. 3 more. Kirk is just making it rain. So thank you, Kirk, for another $5. Wow. He says, Ray says events in one's life over the last years affects stress level. How long would one need to change life to permanently lower stress?
There's something called cell quorum, and basically the cells are in communication with each other all the time. I don't know how long cell memory lasts for, but there could be pockets of tissue that are still under the stress, like the stress mentality, so to speak. So for as long as there are these pockets of cells, there may be some like remnants of the stress event metabolically, right? So to me, one of the most potent ways to stop that stress response altogether is with an anti-serotonin chemical like cyproheptadine. It actually works great, and I've had friends who've been to war and came back with post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD. So basically, the cyproheptadine cured their PTSD for good. And to me, that's a great example of a long-term, like long-living stress long after the event, because they went to war. It's like 2 years in the past, and they're still experiencing the exact same symptoms as if they are to war. They tried thyroid. It helped in the sense of making them less sensitive to new stress, but it did not erase the traumatic memories. And then I remembered that my article that the formation of traumatic memories requires serotonin, and it's been shown that in the tissues, especially the brain, where the trauma still persists as a memory, serotonin levels are elevated, or at least the expression of the serotonin receptors is increased. So, which made me think that an anti-serotonin chemical would help, and so far it has. As far as how long it can continue, I mean, Ray may have said 1 year, but I posted an article that there are transgenerational effects as well. I don't want to scare you, but these things, can go on for generations. The descendants of the Holocaust survivors are now known to have 14 times higher risk of cancer, 8 times higher risk of diabetes, and I think 4 times higher risk of cardiovascular disease. That's already 3 generations after the Holocaust, right? So it can certainly be there. But there are ways to stop it, and I think serotonin is a primary purveyor, mediator of that long-term memory, and getting under control is very important. Thyroid definitely helps as well. But serotonin and getting out of that learned helplessness, in many cases, really is learned helplessness, which is localized. It's not necessarily still in your brain, but tissues are alive. And as much as we are wrongly trained to think that our consciousness is in the brain, it's not there. It's everywhere. So if your arm, for lack of a better example, can still be remembering whatever the traumatic experience was, and you can have PTSD on your arm. So making sure that that the entire organism is stress-free is important. And in my experience, serotonin is a prime mediator. So getting under control is important. So thyroid should help. Progesterone seems to help, but in my experience, it really depends. Like for females, progesterone seems to work better for these to stop the stress response, while for males, pregnenolone seems to work better. But it's only when it comes to like limiting the effects of like a stressful event, or breaking free from the learned helplessness cycle. I don't know why that is so. I think in females, progesterone tends to favor the allopregnanolone route more, while in males, pregnenolone does that. I think in males, progesterone actually tends to go down the androgen pathway more.
Sweet. Thank you so much. A couple more. Ricky rocks for $5. Thank you so much, Ricky. He says, should one not take Cortinon if DHES is already high per blood test since it contains DHEA?
Yeah, I would actually consider not using Cortinon, but either like pure pregnenolone or pure progesterone. And if DHEAS is high, I would do some additional tests for cortisol, total testosterone, and dihydrotestosterone, and also ACTH, and see what's causing it. Typically, if it's of an adrenal origin, ACTH and or cortisol will also be high. If it's of an extra-adrenal origin, if there is a mass somewhere producing androgens, which is possible, but it's very rare, then only DHEAS will be high. There's also a benign condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. These people tend to overproduce DHEA, but their cortisol levels are normal. So it's not dangerous, but I think it's important to know where it's coming from before supplementation can be done. While waiting for the blood test, I think pure progesterone is about as safe as it gets if one wants to supplement with it.
Yeah, I mean, and since I have this article up, it's actually the article that Ray says, increasingly in both sexes, it appears that DHEA may rise in stress as a result of deficiency of thyroid, progesterone, and pregnenolone. And so that's the prostate cancer article. Switch back here. Okay, thank you so much, Ricky. Thank you, Georgi. Kirk has making it rain again for $2. Thank you, Kirk. He says, what vitamins/supplements do you take weekly?
Weekly? Oh, I take a number of things. I take Cortinon maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I take Oxidal a few times a week. I don't think I take anything regular. I used to take niacinamide on a regular basis, but then I found out that I skipped a few days. I did not feel worse, right? But I skipped a week, and then I started to feel like the high free fatty acids getting elevated because my urine started getting foamy again. That's usually a sign of like elevated free fatty acids. So then I started jump back on the niacinamide, but again, no more than 2 or 3 times weekly. Same with aspirin. So at this point, I don't think I'm using anything on a daily basis. Is it like remembering to take it on a daily basis? Just simply because I don't feel the need to. I mean, there were times when I was using the B complex, at the very least niacinamide on a daily basis. I was taking aspirin on a daily basis, but 2 years ago I was taking Cortinon or Pensterone on a daily basis, which is the pregnenolone DHA or progesterone DHA. But then as soon as my test normalized, I felt like there wasn't much need to do that. And now, I mean, I still need them, but it's based on demand, like based on an event only and how I feel. I don't take things just because I feel like I should be doing it every day. For those that don't know, the benefits of aspirin as cancer prevention are actually sufficient, even if you take it twice a month. A new study came out showing that twice a month is enough. You're not getting the most of the benefit if you're taking only twice a month, but twice a month is already having a strong protective effect against the appearance of cancer. And then the most optimal dosage, I think it was an observational study, in contrast to an interventional one. It showed that 2 to 3 times a week is probably optimal for aspirin, specifically when it comes to protection against cardiovascular disease and cancer. So it sort of coincided with how I felt that I don't need to take it every day, so I don't. But if somebody wants to experiment with it, somebody wants to specifically use aspirin to prevent from heart attacks and cancer, 2 to 3 times a week you're probably reaching the plateau for prevention. For treatment is a separate story.
Sweet. Only 2 more, and I take Sinoplus, Sinomel, aspirin when I remember, vitamin D, K on my skin, and then progesterone and DHA when I remember.
Exactly. So you're kind of like me. Basically, like if you feel well, like these things are not really something that's in the back of your mind. I was like, oh my God, I forgot my aspirin. I'm going to die like in the next 10 meters.
I think about it more when the environment I'm in is so bad. You know, I bet there's like
Precisely.
a 5G modem close to my head. You know, so it's like I do things prophylactic. Like I mean, I'm sure it's harming me actively, but just to try to mitigate the bad environment. But yeah, I don't stick to a schedule. I'm very much like you. I'm kind of more free flow these days than, oh, I need to take this at that time or this time.
I used to be like, I want to emphasize, I used to be like that because I felt like I needed it. But lately, I feel like, food is enough. I think it comes down to your health improving, you're restoring the quorum of calmness, right? Versus being the quorum of stress. And it just takes time to get all of the cells not under control, because it shouldn't be an authoritarian thing, but basically convincing that everything's fine, right? But of course, this balance can be disrupted. 5G, I don't know, like annoying psychopathic boss. Like we all have our stresses in life that we cannot avoid, so we try to limit their effect.
Well said. Okay, two more. Francis Bacon Cheeseburger for $5. Thank you so much, Francis. They say, sort of weary of antibiotics. I've heard of hair loss as one side effect. Anything I should take with minocycline to avoid bad side effects? Can I answer? I say if
Sure.
the dose is very low, I don't think there's anything not anything to worry about. But I think that would be a smarter strategy to mitigate any kind of potential symptoms. And I'm just talking about this because I've used minocycline, doxycycline, and antibiotics extensively, and the lower doses seem to present very few problems, whereas the standard doses present some bigger challenges. For example, when I used 100 milligrams of minocycline twice a day, I had dyspepsia, where it felt like I couldn't breathe sometimes. And so, but that never happened when I used 25 milligrams twice a day. And so, and then vitamin K, of course. And what's your take on it?
So first of all, there's studies that came out that show that at doses that where basically you're not getting like the full antibiotic effect, specifically the studies were with doxycycline. 40 milligrams of doxycycline daily had a profound anti-inflammatory effect, which they couldn't explain because in their mind, they're not thinking that doxycycline is a quinone. They're not thinking that it inhibits coxin, LOX, and nitric oxide, right? But basically, so it had like a gut modifying effect without wiping it out. It also had a profound anti-inflammatory effect, which I think speaks to the fact that it still takes care of endotoxin somehow. Because if your endotoxin is high, you cannot fully control inflammation. It's such a systemic inflammatory mediator that you can take a COX inhibitor as much as you want, right? But if your endotoxin is high, you'll find another pathway. So if the 40 milligrams of doxycycline once a day manage to have such a profound anti-inflammatory effect, I think that's enough. That shows that it's taking care of endotoxin, but at the same time, it's not really disrupting your microbiome to the point where, one risk potential with completely wiping out is that fungi may take over. If you have candida, it's an opportunistic pathogen and actually can take over, create problems down the road. So that's really why, like when people are given antibiotics for longer terms or high doses, they're also given an antifungal after that to sort of like take care of any fungal overgrowth. But if you're taking these lower doses, so for minocycline, say 25 milligrams, I would probably do it like the 40 to 50 milligrams because that's the human studies that I've seen with doxycycline and tetracycline. And at those dosages, there were no side effects, like not even like dyspepsia, not even nausea, which is very common with antibiotics. So I wouldn't fear the antibiotics at these low doses because remember they're quinones. So at the lower doses, all they're doing is stimulating respiration, blocking the effects of endotoxin through the TLR4 receptor, right, without disrupting your microbiome too much. So I don't think there's anything to fear when you're capping them at those low doses. At higher doses, yes, there may be potential side effects, but the penicillin family, to me, I think is one of the safest out there. The only side effects that I've seen from massive doses in humans of penicillin family antibiotic was basically diarrhea, which could be severe and could lead to dehydration and things like that, or joint pain. I don't know why. but that was the only thing that I saw, and they were taking 3 to 4 grams a day for a month, which I hope you're not taking unless you have meningitis or some sepsis or some other kind of like really systemic, dangerous infection. So yeah, no reason to fear the antibiotics. It's at least the safer families like the macrolides and the penicillins and the tetracyclines. And if you are using the tetracyclines and you're using the 40 to 50 milligrams daily, I don't think it's anything to fear. It's probably about as safe as vitamin K.
Sweet. Okay, we have one last super chat, but let's just throw this out there one more time. Subscribe, like the stream, leave a comment if you want to be entered in next week's Tokovit giveaway, and you have a pretty good chance of winning, so please enter. Idea Labs DC, Georgi Dinkov's supplement company, boutique supplement company. Check that out, idealabsdc.com. Follow Georgi on Twitter at HateIt. You can follow me at Twitter at Danny Roddy. I do one-to-one coaching, and you can go to dannyroddy.com/resources and check out the details there. I do email and Skype coaching. And people, since I did the single coaching, I kind of took a hit on the subscribe Patreon coaching. And so I've decided to do like a discount. So if you wanted continuous help over 3 months, I would throw in an extra month for free if that was appealing. And a lot of people do sign up for multiple sessions, so I think that's a good way to go if you're interested in that. And then I have these charts and Instagram and testing thyroid function, and I've tried to make this page as useful as possible, so it wasn't just an advertisement. My Instagram, I think, is helpful for people trying to visualize different foods that in like a bioenergetic context. And then, so this is today. This is the live stream schedule with Georgi. I'm tentatively, or more than tentatively, going to do a solo hangout stream on February 11th, and so that's going to be 6 a.m. Pacific time, and that's going to be 6 p.m. my nighttime. And so, depending on how that will go, is if I'll do them again. I was resistant to doing that, but I think I could add some value there, so I think I do want to do it. And then Georgi will be rejoining me on the 21st. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 21st.
Well, it's up to you. I mean, that's
not next week, is it?
No, I mean, it's like should be 2 weeks from now because it's the 7th. Yeah. It was supposed to be yesterday, and 7 and 14 is 21.
Okay, yeah. So Georgi will be back here the 21st, and then if the first solo stream goes well, I'll do one on the 25th. Emma, I owe a huge apology to Emma. She was totally ready to come on and do like a interesting Ray Pete inspired nutrition stream with me, and I didn't have my battery thing figured out. I went to go buy a battery, and it was DOA, and now I have it figured out, but I totally she like got a babysitter probably for children and things, and I just totally dropped the ball on that. So huge apology to Emma Sarakis, who is an amazing individual, and as soon as I can become less embarrassed about wasting her time, I will ask her back on the stream to do something with me. But I know a lot of people were excited about that, and I totally dropped the ball. So huge thank you to Emma for working with me and being so cool. Okay, so last super chat from Jerry B again. So this is ulcerative colitis for $5. He says, let me switch screens here. He says, follow-up prednisone question for ulcerative colitis. My dose is 40 milligrams per day. Is that high? Also, is prednisone cortisol? And why do TNF-A blockers work for ulcerative colitis?
So TNF is a major inflammatory mediator. So that they actually used for pretty much every autoimmune condition. If you go and check the drug Humira, I think its primary mechanism of action is a TNF-A, tumor necrosis factor alpha blocker. 40 milligrams of prednisone is not that much. It's still considered physiological dose, but at that dose, after about a month, you're probably going to start to see some downregulation if you're in your own endogenous adrenal activity. So at that point, I will start to get worried. I don't know for how long you've been taking it. At that dosage, 40 milligrams, it's basically, it's anything over 100 is a problem, and they usually limit it to about a week at most. So you're kind of like in the middle of that. And I've seen the Medrol, which is prednisone, Medrol is just a trade name for prednisone. Is typically given in dosages of 20 milligram tablets daily. You take one, and you can take it for up to a month. So if that has risks for adrenal suppression, I think the 40 milligrams would also do. But again, it's physiological dose. Anything more than 100, that's pharmacological dose, and the doctor will probably want to see you on a semi-regular basis, like at least once a week to test for your adrenal function and see if you're getting suppressed. But other than that, 40 milligrams, anything more than a month, you're probably going to start getting some blood sugar issues. Potentially skin will start getting saggy. You start getting easy bruising. Like when you fall, you'll get like this big blue bruise on your wherever you hit yourself, wherever you injure yourself, and it takes longer to heal. So you're kind of in between the danger zone and the non-danger zone, and this is it's a less dangerous drug than some of the synthetic glucocorticoids known as like things like dexamethasone or betamethasone. The prednisone is essentially the same as the cortisol that the body produces. I think it's the exact same hormone, and they just sell it as under a commercial name. I think it's typically called Medrol, and they call it Medrol packs. They call them these pills that they give you. So prednisone is the equivalent of your endogenous cortisol. It's a glucocorticoid agonist, and then for more extreme cases of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, they use synthetic glucocorticoid agonists, which are much more potent. The most common one is dexamethasone, and it's usually given in dosages of 1 to 2 milligrams daily because it's that much more potent. So 40 milligrams are fine. You could probably mitigate some of its effects, but I wouldn't do this without consulting with a doctor. You can probably mitigate some of the effects of the prednisone by taking a little bit of pregnenolone with it. An older study, actually a series of studies by Hans Selye back in the 60s and 70s, demonstrated that when you combine pregnenolone with an endpoint steroid, such as cortisol or testosterone or dihydrotestosterone, the pregnenolone tends to potentiate the effects that you want from that specific end steroid, while at the same time protecting from some of its really bad side effects. And in this case, we know because pregnenolone has an anti-cortisol effect. So it's not going to negate the anti-inflammatory effect, which is what you want, but at the same time, it may protect from some of the atrophy of skin and organs and muscles and bone, and potentially may protect from some of the adrenal suppression that prednisone will cause if you continue to take it for more than a month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Georgi. Thank you to my dear, dear close friend, John Flaherty. He says, Danny making it rain, Roddy, for $49.99. One of the few open-minded people I knew in San Francisco, so really value his friendship. And Emma Sarakis doesn't hate me, and she says, I forgive you, so I appreciate that. Guys, thank you so much. Just amazing as always. Georgi, thank you for making this stream what it is, and thank you for being so flexible. I think I moved this like 3 times, and then we finally caught each other today, so thank you so much.
Well, I moved it too. I mean, that was supposed to be yesterday, right?
It's okay. But guys, thank you for watching. The show wouldn't be anything without our viewership, so thanks for that. And next week, hopefully a solo show, and we'll see how that goes. Guys, have a safe weekend, or hope you're having a safe weekend. And Georgi, any parting words?
I don't know. I mean, I guess you'll probably start seeing more Georgi studies. So I mean, hopefully there'll be more to come. I think there's some pretty exciting things going on. I finally found a way to test many of these very controversial ideas that will generate a lot of publicity if we manage to repeat them. Especially we think that it's possible to create immortality in the lab. It's based off of an old discussion that I had on the forum about whether cells are immortal or not, whether the Hayflick limit is really there. So there's a user, his alias is Bert Lancaster. I think it stands for Bert Lancaster. I think he's French. Mm-hmm. So we're having this discussion. He said, well, can you find any evidence that cells are really immortal and the Hayflick limit is bunk? So I started looking for these cell cultures that are being sold by labs here in the United States. And then typically the only immortal cells that are known that are sold officially as immortal are cancer cells, specifically the Gila line from Henriette, I think whatever her name was, she had ovarian cancer, died in the 1940s, but her cells are still there. They're the most widely used cancer cell culture in the world. So anyway, so you start looking into it, and then you'll see that cells apparently can be kept alive indefinitely. They wouldn't call it immortal, but they do say indefinitely if you keep them in a culture that's completely free of fats. Now we're going to try to replicate that, and hopefully with some higher complexity living creatures. We're going to start with yeast, and then after that, hopefully like a mouse or a rodent model. And then I already said about like trying to reverse aging and stuff like that. And there's one of our products that I didn't realize. I should have paid more attention to it, but it's the Pyroset, which is a combination of ethyl pyruvate and ethyl acetoacetate. So we were selling it, we're still selling it as like a fatty acid oxidation inhibitor. I did not pay attention, but apparently 3 to 4 studies about ethyl pyruvate in cancer show complete cure of the cancer. So we're going to try to replicate that. So it will be pretty exciting if we can get a cancer cure, with an over-the-counter ingredient. So that's upcoming as well. So you should be seeing a lot more studies that are Georgi studies, and some like validation of both Pete's work and the work of many other people he cites. So hopefully, if it's done by me, I will trust my results more, right? Instead of reading about people's results from the 50s and 60s. And more important than that, we'll try to replicate some stuff, because some of the main criticisms that I'm always getting from actual doctors about Pete's work is that, man, the guy keeps quoting ancient stuff. Like, and the argument has always been like, if it hasn't been replicated, then means medicine has given up on it because it's wrong. Yeah. Something came up along the lines that proved that this is not true, and that's why we're not pursuing it anymore. So I'll try to revive some of the main ideas behind the metabolic theory, which relate to aging, relate to cancer, relate to immortality, really. So let's see what happens. 2020 should be an exciting year.
Straight from the source. Wow, look at that 100% battery. That is amazing. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Sincerely appreciate it. See you guys soon. Thank you so much. Thank you, Georgi. Thank you, everyone. Talk to you guys soon. Peace out.